So that's the Daily Mail on page 31 of today, Saturday, the 31st of October 2020. So the Daily Mail is running this story about the statement made to the Scottish Conservative Ruth Davidson by the former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police about the police not being properly funded. And there is this piece on two pages, pages 8 and 9 of the Daily Mail. And it says there's £6.75 billion PPE debacle. So the personal protective equipment that has been messed up and nearly £8 billion wasted. Who pocketed the £8 billion is the question. There's huge money, billions and billions. And the woman who joined the campaign for Saitan Rushdie to play the role of inciting hatred against Muslims, and the woman who also became notorious by writing the she-devil is now accusing her latest husband of being a he-devil. And at age 89, she is divorcing him, etc. But the contents of the Daily Mail, which remains the house journal for all the kind of ignorant and gullible majority in Britain, has got contradictory pieces every other page about the virus, about the role of the government, and about the opposition, so-called, fronted by Keir Starmer. Now we start about the statement reportedly made by the former Commissioner of the London Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Stevens, Lord, as he is called, Peer. He is a member of the House of Peers, and he was the commissioner in post between 2000 and 2005, very much the time when Bill Ayer was Prime Minister. And this man is saying that the police are no longer feared by the criminal gangs. And he's citing the lack of funding. And he's admitting that burglaries and other crimes, many other crimes, are not being kind of dealt with by the police, London police. Now, this is in contrast to the two-page spread in the same day's Daily Mail about Paul Gambaccini having been kind of found to have been not guilty and now pursuing claims against the police because they harassed him and they kind of pursued him, as he claims, falsely on accusation that he was a child sex abuser, etc., etc. Now, if the police could do that to Paul Gambaccini, that is to say, deploy any number of hours of the police time and any number of personnel of the Metropolitan Police, then that actually has to be taken into account in considering the veracity or the acceptability of what Stevens is saying about the lack of resources. And as we have said about the councils, quite apart from the fact that councils do need money and funding to deliver the services, they exist to deliver to the communities in their boroughs. When the councils do get the money, there is no accountability for the actual use or abuse of the money. And it is clear that hundreds of millions of pounds are wasted by local councils by the sheer abuse of the loophole or the lack of democracy or the accountability. The accounts of the council are never scrutinized by the councillors. Not that councillors have any powers in areas like Tower Hamlets, like Newham next door, not like Hackney next door, or across the River Thames on the south side of the river beyond Greenwich in Lewisham, because these four councils are lumbered with, or the four boroughs are lumbered with the corrupting, aggravatingly anti-democratic and anti-accountability structure called the elected mayor. And nothing in the statement as reported by the Daily Mail attributing it to Stevens actually takes into account any of this. And there is not even a mention of the word democracy or a similar word comparable to the notion of democracy and local accountability. So it's a completely arbitrary, random, unsystematic, intransparent kind of report about the police and the policing and the criminal gangs. As I said earlier today, as well as in the previous broadcasts, and also have been saying this for many, many years, the police in London, or the policing, or the police force, or the idea of the police that we know today was kind of introduced in this country, England, UK, 150 plus years ago. And the complexity and the sophistication of the kind of characters and profiles of the criminals have been fundamentally kind of undergoing fundamental changes over the last 150 years plus. But those changes have not been recognized by the so-called legislators or the lawmakers or the members of parliament. And that includes people who are supposed to know about the law as compared to other people who are not as kind of overly promoted, forensics skilled licensed law traders like Keir Starmer, who is a licensed law trading barrister. Not only that, Starmer was for 5 years the director of public prosecutions. And in those 5 years, Starmer didn't actually do anything to address the role of the police, not necessarily in terms of his decisions as the DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, but in terms of his insights and kind of opinion based on the evidence he was undoubtedly being presented every single week in his capacity as the role as the incumbent in the post for 5 years, post of Director of Public Prosecutions. Because the system in England, in terms of prosecuting criminals, generally is based on the police doing the investigation and any arresting, and then passing on their findings of the investigation to the DPP, and it is up to the DPP to proceed to the next stage, charge a particular individual, a number of individuals, and have them prosecuted through the court system, or not, as they have done in the last few days about the Abu Dhabi Minister of Tolerance. As the Daily Telegraph today, or the Boris Graph, kind of reports, the Abu Dhabi Minister of Tolerance was accused by a 32-year-old young person, an English or British person, 32 years old, who said that the Minister of Tolerance groped her and sexually assaulted her. And she made a complaint, apparently, or a complaint was made on her behalf against the Abu Dhabi Minister of Tolerance. And the English Director of Public Prosecution, or the CPP, the Crown Prosecution Service, decided that there was no kind of ground to prosecute that particular minister. Now, that is the kind of decision, if you like, that the Director of Public Prosecutions makes. And if the Director of Public Prosecution refuses to prosecute somebody, and others believe that that particular person deserves to be prosecuted, then private prosecutions can be mounted. On the evidence of the last few hundred years, private prosecutions to the English criminal courts are very rare, and very kind of rarely do they succeed. So there is a lot there in terms of the complexities and the various factors involved in prosecution, criminal prosecution, and the treatment of criminals and crimes. While Keir Starmer was in post in 2011 as the Director of Public Prosecutions, our campaigns came across evidence that several criminals were plotting criminal attacks, and they should be prevented, and they should be stopped from mounting the criminal attacks. And we sent information to Keir Starmer directly, as well as to the London operation of the CPS, and they all ignored these information communications. Because they did not stop the criminals, as at this time, which is (17:02 hours GMT on Saturday, 31st of October 2020. The damage and the losses that resulted from those criminal attacks are being kind of estimated at being several billion pounds, because the properties were damaged and destroyed, and other damages were caused to person or persons that directly impacted on the protection of the world exclusive evidence materials that were the target of the criminal's attack, and the subject, the actual subject of reference contained in the communication sent to Keir Starmer, who was in post in 2011 and 2012, that is 2 years, 2 calendar years, as the Director of Public Prosecutions. We have been referring to this series of attacks in various items and various issues and editions. This is an updated note today about the claim that the prosecutions and the prevention of crime, prosecutions of criminals and prevention of crimes, known crimes, are being impacted by the lack of resources from the central government in the UK. That is the thrust of what Stevens, the member of the House of Peers, former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, is claiming in the interview that is due to be aired later tonight, that is 21 hours GMT tomorrow, Sunday. Not tonight, but Sunday, the 1st of November 2020, by the radio station LBC, London Broadcasting Company, which is not any longer confined to London because it is now kind of aired from across the UK, various parts. So the damage that individual victims of individual crimes suffer, as kind of summarized by Stevens, due to the alleged lack of resources available to the Metropolitan Police or the police generally in England and Wales, the damage, either singularly or damages in plural, will never come anywhere near the volume and the quality and the impact of these damages caused to the campaigns that were attacked and targeted during 2011-2012. And this campaign is part of the campaigns and the movement that were targeted for attacks by the criminals. And the criminals were not like anonymous criminals that needed investigation before their identity could be established. The criminals included the Tower Hamlets Council and the administration fronted by then incumbent in the post of the corrupt post of elected Mayor Lutfur Rahman, and the criminals making the decisions in the name of the Spitalfield Small Business Association, cited in Tower Hamlets in the Brick Lane area. And so, despite the fact that these criminals were known and there were other criminals were individually named to Keir Starmer as the DPP and to the London office or the London operation of the Crown Prosecution Service separately in emails, neither did any action to stop the criminals or the crimes, nor did they send any follow-up queries as to any area of factual clarification that they might have need to have clarified. So that shows that it was nothing to do with resources. The Director of Public Prosecutions in 2011 and 2012 was adequately resourced. And regardless of the actual level of funding that they got, there had to be no excuse related to the availability of resources for them not to acknowledge receipt of serious allegations or receipt of bona fide, repeatedly reinforced and amplified complaints about criminals plotting to carry out crimes. The criminals, of course, did carry out the crimes, because we never ever make up things. We never make up anything based on supposition. Everything we assert, everything we publish is fact, factually based and verified, fact-based. And the fact that this claim is being made by the former commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, saying that because of lack of resources available to them, the London police or the police generally are ignoring other crimes like burglaries, etc. That is not justifiable, because when they had resources, say several decades ago, our campaign, our movement, being very much an active part of the community, is always in contact with elements that include, by definition, by demographic and statistical kind of definitions, a number that are engaged in criminality or criminal denial of the rest of society and community. So decades ago, our campaign lodged a series of complaints with the then kind of local Tower Hamlets based kind of operation of the Metropolitan Police, citing incidents of crime and violence that had been taking place. And the police never took any action. And that was not explained, and they never acknowledged any information that was filed with them. So Stevens and Ruth Davidson are involved in a propaganda exercise that is exonerating the police of responsibility for big chunks of crimes that the police are not dealing with or prosecuting or acting on. And that's only part of the issue. The police, as we have said, are not operating by complying with the requirements of the various declarations and charters and conventions. These are all international instruments of which the UK remains an active signatory, or to which the UK remains an active signatory. So when the ex-commissioner of the Metropolitan Police says that the police should not be asked to enforce the lockdown kind of regime, he says that it should be only based on consent that is consent of the people affected by the lockdown measures and the policing that may come with it. And the policing of the lockdown must only be carried out with consent of the people. Now, the word consent has always been cited as underlying the operation of the police in this country, regardless of the pandemic or whatever. For more than 100 years, policing is done with the people's consent. That is the claim, that is the slogan, that is the boast. Policing is not done with the consent of the people. And despite the fact that Stevens is reported or quoted as saying that, that is not practically kind of justifiable as being the case. There is no accountability for police behavior in any real way, whereas the police have the highest amount of power over the individual members of the society, which means that they must be subject to the highest standard and rigors of accountability. Yet there is none. And the fact that we have got a licensed law trader called Keir Starmer as leader of the Labour Party now, things are even bleaker notionally, because Starmer would never want to do anything that would make him come across as being critical of the so many mates in the police system that he has no doubt made friends. Now, as opposed to Starmer, Corbyn notionally, theoretically, was able to raise questions of accountability that the police must be subject to. That was notional, but he didn't do that. And we shall continue this in part 5.